Hello again, welcome back. Here we are to continue talking about JavaScript and asynchronous JavaScript and promise. So if you read the section on promises and callbacks, you're getting a pretty good idea, hopefully, of how this works. And if you're not, just keep working on this and it'll start to become clear over time. We're kind of covering a lot of ground here, but we've worked our way from, callbacks, which were the old school way to handle asynchronous stuff, through promise, which was the newer, more modern way. And JavaScript now gives us a couple extra keywords that work specifically with promise that make it even easier to work with promises in asynchronous code. These are the keywords async and await. And you may have seen this in code before, and if you've ever wondered like what they do, we're going to look at them today and study them. Okay, so here's the code that we had earlier. We've got a function that returns a promise, and then we handle the promise. If it's successfully, or if it resolves successfully, we handle it here with then. And if it rejects or fails or errors, we handle the error with catch. Okay, so how can we make this code even easier to read? Okay, what we're going to use is async and await. Okay, so anytime you use the keyword await, what's going to happen is JavaScript is going to wait on this line until a promise resolves. So you can only use await on a line of code that resolves to a promise. So getWeather returns a promise, right? And instead of us having to call then and include the callback, what we can do is we can just collect the data. So we can say, hey, let's wait for this to resolve, and then whatever it resolves to, put it here. So that's the same thing as this, right? Okay, so actually let me undo that, and let's copy it and then compare the two, right? So I'm gonna write this twice, okay? So up here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put await, and then instead of using the callback here that resolves to data, what I'm going to do is I'm going to catch the data, or store it here. So when this resolves, it'll put the data there. The thing is, this is going to take some time to resolve, and putting the keyword await here makes JavaScript wait on this line until the promise here resolves. Okay, so 2 seconds later, then it's going to put our variable into data and then continue on to the next line. Normally JavaScript just runs through all these lines. That's why the code here looks like it does, right? Because it's gonna, just do every line of code immediately, and then these callbacks are gonna be run at a future time, okay? Not so with await, okay? So if we have this here, we can just eliminate this thing, right? And then that reads a lot better. If getWeather is going to return some data, we can just wait for it to complete because it's asynchronous, right? We have to handle the catch in a different way. So I'm just going to delete that for now, right? Especially if we delete it, then it looks really great, right? Like this looks really easy to understand. So now there's one problem here. Okay, so I'm going to run my code and see what happens, right? I get an error. It says await is a problem, and it says syntax error. Await is only valid inside an async function. Okay, so this is where the keyword async comes in. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to write a function here called, I'm going to call this one fetchWeather because I'm already using getWeather, right? So let's say anytime you wanted to get the weather data, what you would do is you would call your fetchWeather function, and fetchWeather is going to call the getWeather function, and then it's going to use await. And now again, it says await is only valid in an async function. So that means that fetchWeather has to be asynchronous. Okay, so I'll say async in front of function. So we just add the keyword here. This function becomes asynchronous. And what it means is that any code in here, like if I set a variable here, const, x equals 99, this code would run immediately, and then it would move on to the next line of code, just like regular JavaScript, just like you would expect. If you run into a line that has await on it, the computer waits on this line before moving on to the next line. So earlier, we logged the data to the console, right? And that's missing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log it here like this, right? And the effect here is going to be this. We call the async function. I'll say fetch weather. And what's going to happen is it's going to execute this line of code immediately, move on to this line. It'll see that get weather returns a promise, and await will say, let's wait right here on this line of code until that promise is resolved. 2 seconds later, it gets the value, assigns it to data, and then it moves on to line number 13. Okay, so in order to get this to work, we have to make sure that we actually call the function to run the code there. So let's put this line here and see what happens, right? I'm going to clear the console and run our code. So we wait 2 seconds, and then same effect as before, we log our data, okay? So how do we handle an error, okay? So in the case of an error, what we want to do is we want to use a try catch block. I'm going to get rid of this because we don't really need it, but just I put that in there just to show you that code that isn't marked with the await keyword just runs as normal, okay? So how do we handle an error? What we're going to do is we're going to do a try catch block, okay? So if I say try and then I do catch, it's kind of like an if statement, right? So think about it as an if statement, okay? So try says, hey, you know, here's some code I'd like to try, but it might fail, okay? It might succeed, it might fail, we don't know, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try it, okay? But try sets up a situation where the computer's ready for an error, okay? And it can catch that error, and then inside the catch block here, we can determine how to handle that error. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the same thing that we did here, right? And we'll basically console log the error message, okay? So here is our code using async and await. Right, so we've got an asynchronous function. We call on it. We can try to do something. So we're going to try to do this thing right here. We send a message to the internet. It returns a promise. We're waiting for that promise to resolve or to reject. And if it resolves, then we'll do the console log here, and we'll skip the catch block, and this function ends. If the code here inside of try throws an error, then we'll skip to the catch block, and it will catch the error, and we can handle the error in some way. So let's give that a try. So I'll run my code again, wait 2 seconds for it to finish, and that one resolved. What if I set up my error message right here? So I'm going to reject right there, and then see what happens, right? So let me run this. And you can see it says, server is broken, right? So basically, we called get weather, we set up a promise, our timeout ran. When the timeout completed 2 seconds later, we rejected the promise and created a new error message, and that threw an error right here. So try said like, okay, I was ready to catch that error, and I see the error happening, so I'm going to send it to the catch block. So it's try and catch is a lot like if and else. So we're going to say like, hey, if everything's okay, do the code here, else, handle the error in the catch block. Okay? So thanks for watching. I hope that was interesting there, and another look at how to work with promises and async and await. And what I'd like you to do is read the JavaScript info article on async await. So you can Google that, or I'll include a link in the description, but you'll look up JavaScript info async await, right? And this has a really good description of async and await, okay? And it's basically everything we just did, but you can kind of read some background and get a little more information on it, right? And you can try this example on your own. You can get my code running on your computer, and see how it works. And then later we're going to actually build an app using this stuff, okay? So thanks for watching.